does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
That looks like a second plane. Has
I
just
did
hit.
not see a plane go in.
Today, our fellow
I
citizens,
just saw another
our way
plane
of life,
coming in.
our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us
What you're watching here is a video I made back in 2011 after bin Laden was killed by SEAL Team 6. It was a tribute to G.W. Bush and the War on Terror. I once believed, as many others, the official narrative of the attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001. And here are the things that have forever changed my mind. May 28th, 2001, the World Trade Center, encapsulated here in a rare glimpse into one of its final days. For in just 3.5 months, this site will be renamed Ground Zero, and the world will forever be changed. But in just a few days, NORAD will run a full-on terrorist simulation. This simulation will be conducted with naval ships, members of the Air Force, and will feature a fictitious attack orchestrated by none other than Osama bin Laden, using drone plane technology and cruise missiles. A haunting near run-through of the attacks that would occur just 3 months later. Which begs the question, how many people do you think know that just 3 months prior to 9/11 they wargamed an Osama bin Laden terror attack with planes? I would imagine not many. But to properly tell this story of unbelievable coincidences known as 9/11, we need to go back even further.
USA Today reports that in the 2 years before the attacks on September the 11th, NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons. And one target was the World Trade Center. Here's ABC's Brian Ross.
President Bush has said again and again that no one could have imagined what Osama bin Laden ordered for September 11th.
We knew he hated us, but there was nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government, that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The email was obtained by the nonprofit group Project for Government Oversight. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are questions, big questions, about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
It's quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian.
Well, that is quite amazing. It's also quite amazing that it took until 2004 for this little piece of information to poke its head out. Because as Peter Jennings himself reported on the day of 9/11, our government were quite clear that, quote, none of them could have foreseen this coming.
The question is, go to war with whom? because from the FBI, from the CIA, from the Pentagon today, no warning of this whatsoever, no knowledge of who's involved, no clues yet as to who's involved that we have heard about in any respect today.
Now a proven lie, which again poses the question, how many people do you think know that in the 24 months leading up to September 11th, NORAD conducted simulations including jets being flown into the World Trade Center and wanted to hold one with a commercial airliner being flown into the Pentagon? My guess would be next to zero. And while their request to run said simulation of a hijacked plane into the Pentagon just 5 months before September 11th was denied, it's of note that this request was for a second run-through of such an event, not a first. The Pentagon already hosted one that October 24th, 2000. A mass casualty event is held at the Pentagon featuring a plane smashing through to its courtyard with full-scale models and everything, which is interesting to me because I feel like this should be the number one story every single September 11th. At very least, it should have been the first thing reported on in the immediate aftermath. It wasn't. Why would you want to hide these simulations from public knowledge? Now, going back to this initial description of Amalgam Virgo, it states that this was a, quote, planning exercise involving the hypothetical scenario of a cruise missile or UAV launched by a terrorist group. UAV stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, otherwise known as a drone plane. These aircraft are remotely piloted with various degrees of autonomy. The most infamous of these being introduced just 6 years prior to September 11th in 1995, the MQ-1 Predator. When you come down and look at its command and sensor systems capabilities, you'll find that by the year 2000, improvements in communication systems made it possible, at least in theory, to fly the drone remotely from great distances. It was no longer necessary to use close-up radio signals during the Predator's takeoff and ascent. Now, to many of us, it is believed that the U.S. went into Afghanistan in October of 2001. If you Google, when did the U.S. go to Afghanistan? It states that the U.S. went there in 2001. Even the Wikipedia page, Manhunt for Osama bin Laden, starts its timeline in November of 2001. But what if I told you it started before that? What if I told you that it started at least a year before that? What if I told you that the CIA was already in Afghanistan hunting bin Laden in the summer of 2000? What if I told you that their team name was the Bin Laden Unit and that they were using full-size Predator drone planes to do it? That's right. The Afghanistan hunt for Osama bin Laden started before the September 11th attacks. The only thing that changed following them was that now it no longer required secrecy. Now the hunt for bin Laden had the full consent of the public, along with new permission to launch a full-scale military invasion.
Here is Tom Brokaw.
Good afternoon, everyone. It does now appear that United States military action against targets in Afghanistan, that action is underway. Let's go to NBC's Jim Miklashevsky at the Pentagon for the latest. Jim?
Tom, U.S. military officials tell NBC News that the airstrikes have begun. According to these...
Former managing editor of the Washington Post, Steve Cole, gives some insight into the real manhunt for Osama bin Laden and the emergence of the Predator drone as a tool of the Air Force/CIA. In Chapter 29 of 2005's Ghost Wars. We take you back now to a year and a half before the attack on the Twin Towers. By the late spring of 2000, Richard Clarke and his White House counterterrorism group had grown frustrated by the quality of intelligence reporting on Osama bin Laden's whereabouts. The CIA's unilateral human sources and its liaisons with Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and Masood had generated volumes of fragmented hearsay, but nothing solid enough to warrant missile strikes or a snatch operation. Clark asked his longtime acquaintance in the national security bureaucracy, Charles Allen, who ran all of the CIA's intelligence collections efforts, to work with Admiral Scott Fry, head of operations at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on fresh approaches to the bin Laden problem. Clark and his aides continued to hope the Pentagon would come up with a plan to use American commandos in Afghanistan. This is spring 2000. So where the public was led to believe the invasion of Afghanistan was a knee-jerk reaction, it was not. They were vying for a way to go to Afghanistan at very least a year earlier. The book continues, despite the confusion of competing recollections, it seems clear, in the general sense, that Clark, Fry, Berger, Allen, Black, and officers in the CIA's bin Laden unit jointly conspired, amid persistent squabbling among themselves, to launch the Predator experiment. It was these efforts that finally got them the approval to send Predator drones to Afghanistan. In the summer of 2000, the CIA begins engaging in secret talks with Uzbekistan for permission to use it as a jump-off point to fly the reconnaissance drones over Afghanistan. The reason for involving Uzbekistan is because in the early days of drones, they could only be remotely piloted from a distance while already in the air. Takeoff and landing were trickier and required a nearby control station. The drones were first tested in Bosnia in 1995, then Kosovo in 1999. What the CIA found was that they were too light and too slow. Also, there was the problem of the nearby control station. The pilot had to sit in a sealed, unmarked van near the runway of the drone's operating base. For the two aforementioned operations in Bosnia and Kosovo, these bases were in Hungary and Albania. The van was surrounded by generators and satellite dishes, with a pilot inside using a joystick in front of a screen. The drone was controlled by radio signal and then satellites. But next would be Afghanistan, and securing relations in Uzbekistan for the operation in Afghanistan was proving a no-go. If this was going to be pulled off, they were going to have to try a new way. So the CIA gets approval to test a new technology. Full remote drone flights. Takeoff, landing, and all. Piloted straight from the inside of a CIA operations center in Virginia. September of 2000, they run their first flight and pull it off. The CIA has their new toy. 100% remote-controlled, full-size drone planes. Just 1 year before September 11th. Being able to run drone flights straight from home proves to be a game changer. And with their new technology in hand, Air Force drone pilots and CIA officers go on to run 15 Predator drone flights over Afghanistan, manned 100% from the United States. This would, however, only last 1 month, when the program is abruptly ended by Washington. The CIA's operations in Afghanistan put once again in serious jeopardy. It would be just 1 week later, October 11, 2000, that the CIA would present a classified bulletin on Afghanistan highlighting the, quote, growing threat of the Taliban. The very next day, the USS Cole is bombed. What perfect timing. The CIA immediately insists it's bin Laden, who they had been searching for right up until a week earlier. Now think about that for a second. Right as their mission is shut down, a new need for it suddenly pops up. That doesn't seem like interesting timing to anyone? Now to the public, this attack had one name attached to almost every headline: Osama bin Laden. But what went unreported is that internal documents on the Cole reveal that bin Laden had not been tied personally to the attacks, and that despite the headlines, the FBI and the CIA had not provided a definitive conclusion about responsibility. Yemeni Prime Minister Iriani echoed this to the press when he stated that while investigators suspected he was indirectly involved, they had yet to find hard evidence. In fact, if you go to bin Laden's FBI Most Wanted poster, nowhere does it mention the USS Cole or 9/11. When contacted about this in 2006, FBI Chief of Investigative Publicity Rex Toome stated that the reason for this was because the FBI had no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11, and that bin Laden, as such, has never formally been charged by a grand jury. Which is interesting because the main name attached to 9/11 and the USS Cole is Osama bin Laden. It would be just 2 weeks after the bombing of the USS Cole when the curiously similar simulation drills would begin. October 24th, 2000. The Pentagon holds their aforementioned mock mass casualty exercise in which a plane crashes into its courtyard. Okay? The Pentagon paid someone to make scale model mock-ups of itself with a plane crashed into it just 10 months before September 11th. 7 months after that, NORAD would wargame out the, quote, hypothetical, yet also suspiciously on the nose scenario of Osama bin Laden using drone planes to launch a terror attack. And 3.5 months after that, both of these things would actually happen.
Oh my goodness.
Oh God.
There's another one.
Oh.
Oh my goodness, there's another one.
This seems to be on purpose.
Oh my goodness,
Another
now you...
plane?
Now it's obvious, I think.
So what came first, chicken or the egg? How is it possible that the exact thing happened that they had been running training simulations on since the previous year, involving the exact vehicle they had just developed unique, high-end, one-of-a-kind technology to full remote control the previous year, with the aftermath being the public begging them to do the exact thing they were seeking permission for the previous year? Invade Afghanistan.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. I'm speaking to you today from the Treaty Room of the White House, a place where American presidents have worked for peace. We're a peaceful nation. In the months ahead, our patience will be one of our strengths. Patience with the long waits that will result from tighter security. Patience in understanding that it will take time to achieve our goals. Patience in all the sacrifices that may come. Today, those sacrifices are being made by members of our armed forces.
To outright dismiss the idea that September 11th may have been planned by individuals in our own government is crazy. But that's just the start of it. Here's where the long list of, quote, incredible coincidences that are 9/11 begin to pile up. For instance, what if I told you that former Secretary of State James Baker and former Deputy Director of the CIA Frank Carlucci spent the morning of September 11th at a conference with none other than Osama bin Laden's brother, Shafiq bin Laden, with George Bush Sr. also being there, among all three, just the day before. The event? An investors conference for the Carlyle Group, an investment firm that just so happened to be at the time one of the U.S. military's largest vendors. Carlyle Group achieved this status by owning Lear Sigler Services, a leading contractor in aircraft logistics support, maintenance, pilot training, and ground support. They also owned United Defense Inc., which manufactured combat vehicles, artillery, naval guns, missile launchers, and precision munitions. Both of these companies went on to receive billions in Pentagon contracts in the aftermath of 9/11. Carlyle Group was more specifically a private equity firm, which in layman's terms means that they buy fledgling companies, restore them over the course of 5 to 10 years, and then sell them for a profit. Basically like flipping houses, but with million-dollar corporations. Carlyle were essentially put on the map when they brokered a deal for Prince Alawid bin Talal to buy $590 million of Citicorp in 1991. But what made things really take off for them was in 1993 when none other than George Soros invested $100 million in their Carlyle Partners II fund. With Soros' endorsement, the floodgates opened, and by September of 1996, Carlyle Partners II fund had shot past their initial goal of $500 million to $1.3 billion. They immediately sunk this cash into defense, aerospace, and security companies. This investment would pay off massively in the wake of the September 11th attacks and become their most successful venture ever. This could not have been more of a conflict of interest. For starters, Carlyle chairman Frank Carlucci was Donald Rumsfeld's college roommate. Secretary of State Colin Powell was a Carlyle advisor who considered Carlucci to be a mentor, and even President Bush was a former Carlyle employee. With his father, Bush Sr., and the bin Laden family both being actively involved with Carlyle at the time of September 11th. Bush, Baker, and Carlucci had even flown overseas to visit the bin Laden's family headquarters in the years leading up to 9/11. How is this not talked about? How is Bush Sr. and bin Laden's brother being together on the eve of September 11th at a conference for an investment company that made a mass fortune because of September 11th, not a main talking point of September 11th? Or the other interesting coincidence that President Bush's brother, Marvin Bush, was the head of the digital security company for the Twin Towers, Securicom. Or this doozy from the 9/11 Commission transcript, where Condoleezza Rice admits that a strategy to eliminate Al-Qaeda was formed before 9/11, in that spring and summer. Yeah, we noticed. She states that early in 2001, President Bush had told her that he didn't want to respond to Al-Qaeda one attack at a time because he was, quote, tired of swatting flies. But instead, he was developing a new comprehensive strategy to eliminate Al-Qaeda once and for all. In fact, it was the very first national security presidential directive of the Bush administration. After being developed through spring and summer, this, quote, new strategy was finally approved, giving it the go on September 4th, 2001. Just 1 week to the day of 9/11, a new strategy to take out Al-Qaeda is launched. And just 1 week later, all the permission in the world to launch said plans is handed to them on a silver platter.
It is called No Better Time, the brief, remarkable life of Danny Lewin, the genius who transformed the internet. As Don Dale reports, he is believed to be the first casualty of the September 11th attacks.
American Airlines Flight 11 left Boston on a clear Tuesday morning 12 years ago.
Good morning, American 11 with you, passing through 190-230.
What unfolded shortly after takeoff is haunting.
The cockpit's not answering. Somebody's stabbed in business class. And I think there's mates that we can't breathe. I don't know. I think we're getting hijacked.
The passenger stabbed in business class was 31-year-old Danny Lewin. He was seated between 3 of the suspected hijackers. They knifed him, investigators believe, on the way to the cockpit. Born in Denver, Lewin moved to Israel, where he joined the Army, becoming captain of an elite Special Forces unit. From there, Lewin entered a master's program at MIT, where he met mathematics professor Tom Layton.
It was pretty quickly apparent he was special.
They started designing computer codes to speed up the sluggish pace of the old dial-up internet. Eventually, those codes turned into a company called Akamai and turned them into overnight billionaires.
I hope you guys get a sense there that this is pretty huge. The goal there really is to dominate the world.
Now, while a touching piece on the familiar and heartbreaking story of 9/11's first victim, Danny Lewin, CBS curiously falls short of certain details. For starters, Danny wasn't a captain in just any elite Special Forces unit. He was a captain in the most elite Special Forces unit in the entire IDF, the Sayeret Matkal, the premier Israeli Black Ops group that, amongst other things, dealt in irregular warfare and counterterrorism. And while this graphic is correct in showing Danny's seat, they fail to mention that despite looking like row 4 or 5, this is in fact row 9. Row 9 of Flight 11. And this picture, shown at about 40 seconds into this piece, is from a photo shoot that Danny took just a year earlier in front of what are framed to look like 2 gray towers, wearing a watch named the Hijacker. That's right, the well-publicized first victim of 9/11 was an Israeli Black Ops specialist seated in row 9 of Flight 11 who just so happens to have pictures of himself in front of gray towers wearing a watch named the Hijacker. What are the odds of that? I mean, that's almost too on the nose to be ignored. Now, remarkably enough, Danny Lewin isn't the only captain from the Sayeret Matkal with an interesting connection to 9/11. Let's hear from another.
Well, I was getting this question in the 1990s, and I said that the West really doesn't understand militant Islam. So I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
Mark, were you close enough to be able to see any markings on the airplane?
Hi, gentlemen. How you doing? Yeah, there was definitely a blue logo. It was like a circular logo on the front of the plane, definitely towards the front. It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the sides, and as far as I knew when I saw it coming down, I was like, well, LaGuardia is pretty far away, and that plane is really slow.
Mark, if what you say is true, those could be cargo planes or something like that. You said you didn't see any windows in the side?
I didn't see any windows on the sides. I saw the plane flying low. I was probably like a block away from the subway in Brooklyn, and that plane came down very low. And again, it was not a normal flight that I've ever seen at an airport. It was a plane that had a blue logo on the front, and it did not look like it belonged in this area.
Winter 2000. An Austrian art group named Gelatin begins an ongoing project on the upper levels of the World Trade Center to allegedly add a balcony to the outside. It's called the Bee Thing. And on the morning of March 12, 2000, this helicopter is commissioned to capture the event. And standing on a makeshift balcony extending out of Tower 1 are the members of Gelatin. This video appears to be a recon mission to get pictures of the towers with the balcony serving as a reference point. The event is immortalized in a rare piece of press appearing in the August 18th, 2001 edition of the New York Times, and features what at the time may have seemed like a throwaway line, that while occupying the towers, Gelatin confiscated all film and video of the project. Why confiscate every piece of media if you're just really there doing a balcony? Why not simply tell them just not to release it till you're done? They certainly didn't intend to hide it forever. There's an article about it in the New York Times less than 1 year later. And they also published their own 62-page book about it. The book is absolutely damning. The main middle fold-out, for starters, is of Tower 1. The only other thing on the page is a plane. The book also clarifies the exact location of this stunt. The 91st floor of Tower 1. But that's not even the half of it. This picture, seen featured in the New York Times write-up, appears in the book as a 2-page layout, in high def and completely uncropped, with the full version revealing that the entire wall of boxes are labeled BB18. BB18 is a popular fuse housing for when you have 1,000,000 wires that you need to organize. What would in our team be doing surrounded by empty fuse housing boxes? Gelatin, coincidentally, is also the name of a high-powered blasting gel that cannot explode without a detonator. That paints quite a picture. The back sketch in their own book even refers to this cardboard enclosure as the, quote, Trojan box. But it also shows another thing. This sketch reveals that Gelatin had after-hour night access to the towers, where they note that the Trojan box, quote, opens at 11:45 p.m. and shuts down at 6:39 a.m., meaning that they were working in the towers through the night. And their notes earlier in the book shows that they also had access on the weekends. Which brings us to what I consider to be the 3 most damning sketches of the bee thing. Now keep in mind, these are supposed art students, okay? Now I know art doesn't always mean drawing, it can mean many things, but nevertheless, these look like the scribbled out blueprints of a heist. Here's one with the tower that says, very depressing building inside, very amazing building outside. Odd. We want to break through to the amazement from the inside. Okay, like a bomb breaking out. And then, if you follow the arrow from the first World Trade Center drawing, it brings you to a second World Trade Center drawing that literally looks like it's collapsing. And on this one, instead of saying depressing inside, it says deep pression inside. Pression means pressure. Deep pressure inside. Next to a sketch of the World Trade Center starting to crumble. Definitely not shady. Here's a sketch of someone jumping out of the Twin Towers, an unfortunately all too familiar sight on that dreadful morning. And finally, this sketch that has God crossed out in the clouds, but rewritten under a picture of an airplane. And right next to that, a line just before the towers that reads, last chance to open a parachute. The only reason you would need a parachute would be if your plane was about to crash into that tower. All right, so this is a sketchbook that shows a crumbling tower, another sketch of the towers with the hole right where the plane hits and the same size, unless that's the biggest balcony in the history of mankind, right under a picture of a plane with the word God written under it and last chance to open a parachute. They had weekend and night access. The only pictures of them are standing next to 100 fuse boxes. Their name is Gelatin, which is a high-powered explosive, and it's called the bee thing, working on the same area of the building where the first explosion hits. But according to Gelatin, this was just a fun project to build a balcony. Well, if they have nothing to hide, then why in 2005 did they change their name from Gelatin, spelt like the explosive, to Gelatin, spelt with an I? And again, why did they confiscate all video and film of the project? And why is the website on their book, The Bee Thing, that featured these 3 most damning drawings, now removed? Even on their website, these drawings are nowhere to be found. The closest you can get is this link right here, and it only shows you a couple. If you have nothing to hide, why would you hide these? Are all official ties between Gelatin and these pictures deleted forever? The answer? No. In fact, Gelatin still stores these pictures on this very website. And while there is no menu, submenu, or link anywhere on the page to access them, if you come up to the URL box and manually replace projects with WTC, it takes you to a hidden gallery. That includes, you guessed it, these very sketches. Image 3, man jumping out of the towers.
Oh, fuck, man.
Someone just fell.
Image 6. Last chance for a parachute.
Yeah!
And image 10. The building collapsing. All three erased everywhere else, but kept hidden here like trophies. Which brings us back to this footage. Because not one, but two R teams curiously took aerial helicopter footage of the 91st floor of Tower 1 in the year and a half leading up to the attack. Both eerily similar, with people standing in the windows of the 91st floor. First Gelatins in March 2000 was taken on the east facade, and then the E-teams a year later taken on the north facade, directly in line with the first hit. Even eerier, just weeks before that, E-team would light up 5 floors with their name. Look familiar? They lit up floors 90 to 94, and the first plane explosion hits floors 93 to 99. What are the odds? The middle of their footage even contains an animation of the near exact flight path of Flight 11. The B thing and the E team. A chilling memorial of the World Trade Center's final days. Gelatin's work on the B thing would be presented at Leo Koning's gallery. Opening day? You guessed it, September 11th, 2001. Now, many of you might wonder why the topic of 9/11 is one that's so near and dear to me. I think in many ways, on the surface, my story parallels a lot of others. It was traumatizing. It felt like my backyard. The vision of watching the towers cross the water engulfed in smoke will forever be etched in my brain. But my real connection came later. Because 5 months following 9/11, February of 2002, I began my journey as a surveyor / skyscraper layout engineer in New York City on Trump Building F. I did this and also detailing later on for 17 years. And basically what that entails is this. When a company sets out to start a building, I'm the guy who's given the architectural set of blueprints and the structural set of blueprints, along with any other details, insert plans, mechanical drawings, and so on. I'm the guy who gets the information. It's my job to then calculate and really convert the numbers in each set into the localized grid coordinate system I've created for the job. Then I essentially have to translate them into English for the rest of the job via field working plans, establish a new line and grade on every floor, and finally use my field drawings and the new line and grade to physically lay out every single aspect of every single floor. So it's safe to say, if there was ever one topic I was qualified to give an opinion on, it would be the collapse of a building. Now, of course, this is just my personal assessment based on the things I know about skyscrapers, coupled with years and years of studying these videos over and over again. The first things first, those buildings were tanks. I mean, those might have been the 2 sturdiest buildings on the entire planet. The majority of buildings get most of their strength from the core, around the elevator shaft. It's where the heaviest steel will be. It'll come up the middle of the building. It creates essentially a spine. So this is where most of the strength in the buildings come from. However, if you look at the Twin Towers, they were built like that, like every other building, but they were also built with an exoskeleton of some of the heaviest steel in any building citywide. To make a hole that size in those buildings, you'd have to drive an aircraft carrier into them. A plane like that would just shred itself like paper. Half of it wouldn't even enter the building, would just crumble and fall to the ground. I don't care how much jet fuel's on board. Take a look at this video of this plane being scrapped here. The demo claws are going through it like paper. They're nothing. They're lightweight aluminum cylinders. There is no way on planet Earth that that thing could blow a hole that big into one of the most solid buildings ever created. This 25-foot high aluminum can that can't even withstand hitting a seagull blows an 80-foot crater in this building? I don't think so. There almost had to be explosives either on board or pre-planted at the impact zone. which brings us to the collapse itself. Now you have the top 10 plus floors about to fall onto the bottom 90, leading us to everyone's favorite theory. They say it pancaked. Oh, the building just pancaked. Well, first of all, it's not even what pancaking looks like. When floors pancake, the horrible occurrence that is, they stop in between each drop. It goes floor, 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 floor. Now look at this video right here. You can see briefly there's a lot of smoke. It drops the floor and then stops for a second. Then it drops again. Or look at this one collapsing. It collapses the floor and then falls over. These are the two most common occurrences with a pancake. It either goes floor, stop, floor, stop, floor, stop. Or what most likely would have happened is it would have come down those first couple floors and then the whole top would have fell off onto the streets. Furthermore, buildings hit with projectile, in the case of this example, missiles, almost always tip over. These buildings neither pancaked or tipped over. They free fell perfectly into their own footprint. It is nearly impossible to get a clean, straight down collapse without a building being meticulously pre-wired for demo. The odds of it happening 3 out of 3 times to 3 buildings, all with significantly different damage done to them, is a statistical impossibility. There's only one thing on Earth that can make 3 buildings with 3 different damage locations free fall perfectly into their own footprint, and that is controlled demolition, period. It's not even up for debate. Now let's take a look at the Nodia Twin Tower demolition video from August of 2022.
हिंदुस्तान समय की पाबंदी नहीं है।
Demolished to dust in just 7 and 9 seconds. Look familiar? In this, they use the implosion technique, an advanced technique used most commonly for demolishing high-rise buildings. This method is adopted when there are many surrounding buildings. In this way, the demolition of the building is done right onto its footprint. Its advantages are listed as being, quote, more suitable for tall buildings and being fairly fast. Exactly how the towers came down. Free fall speed. And what type of explosive is commonly used in the implosion method? You guessed it, gelatin.
We heard a loud explosion, and at that point, Building 2 was collapsing.
They heard a loud explosion immediately preceding the building's collapse. And this wasn't the only report of major explosions preceding the building's collapses. In fact, if you go back to the in real-time coverage, it was a near certainty.
And you can see the 2 towers, a huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
And then when we came outside, it just blew, the tower blew.
All of a sudden you hear explosion and you could see the building starting to collapse.
There was another major explosion. The building itself, literally the top of it came down.
We understand now there has been a secondary explosion on Tower 2.
Again, there was a third explosion. It's unclear what caused it, whether it was a bomb or whether the first plane that crashed into the tower had somehow been booby-trapped with a bomb that was timed to explode later after the crash had occurred.
It was an explosion. It was way up where the fire was, and the whole building at that point bellied out in flames, and everybody ran.
The tower, rather, that has collapsed, though we are told, collapsed because of a third explosion. Both have been hit by planes. We understand it was a third explosion, however, that brought the tower to collapse.
As we were moving towards the building, we saw the top begin to blow out in a plume of smoke, and we heard the noise associated with an implosion.
When the first tower collapsed, it was a massive explosion. I looked up, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down.
The offices are located.
Wow.
And some people were...
Jamie, I need you to stop for a second. There has just been a huge explosion. We can see a billowing smoke rising. And I'll tell you that I can't see that second tower, but there was a cascade of sparks and fire, and now it looks almost like a mushroom cloud explosion.
You can just hear this huge kaboom.
At that point, we heard a large boom. I looked up and just saw the building coming at us.
Hello? Yeah, David Lee, what can you tell us?
John, the scene is horrific. One of the two towers literally collapsed. I was making my way to the foot of the World Trade Center. Suddenly, while talking to an officer who was questioning me about my press credentials, we heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us. Just seconds ago, there was a huge explosion, and it appears right now the second World Trade Tower has just collapsed.
Are you able to talk? Can we just talk to you about what happened?
I was back there when it exploded.
You were right there at the building?
Yes, I'm able to try.
When I tried to save people, in the moment we heard a big explosion coming down. Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them. And it was a big explosion and everything got dark.
Pandemonium here a short time ago. When the building did collapse or whatever it was that happened, it was a huge explosion, a huge rumbling cloud of smoke and fire came across Church Street.
We could hear a rumble, which was about 5 seconds long, preceding the actual collapse, and then a boom when each of those towers collapsed.
I was about 5 blocks away when I heard explosions, 3 thuds, and turned around to see the building we just got out of, antenna tip over and fall in on itself.
We're not sure exactly what happened, but it was another explosion on the far side of one of the buildings from where we're standing. The reverberation and another explosion on the right-hand side.
According to the Associated Press, another building that has either been attacked or exploded.
It sounded like the 4th of July. You heard a big explosion before the building fell?
I saw it as it was happening, and it sounded as if you had 100 of those little black cat firecrackers and you lit them all off at once. That's what it sounded like.
1013-012 has had a major explosion and what appears to be a complete collapse surrounding the entire area.
Do you know if it was an explosion or if it was a building collapse?
To me, it sounded like an explosion. Then the building, the rolling sound sounded like the building collapsed.
And in addition to all these, there were also reports of many preliminary explosions going off from while the buildings were still standing.
Then somebody said that they saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, I don't know, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
There was an internal explosion in the building, maybe like 10, 15 minutes later.
The first explosion, and there was a second explosion in the same building. There were 2 explosions.
Okay.
I was over there. 2 explosions. Blowing the lights up. Plane hit that? Plane. I heard 2 explosions. 2 separate ones.
They're twin towers?
2 explosions, however. There was a first explosion that was louder, and then a second explosion.
Firefighters brought a lady to us that was covered in smut, and we heard an explosion, turned around, commandeered an ambulance, and we left the scene very quickly.
Then there was a secondary explosion.
Just about ready to go outside when we heard a secondary explosion.
Doctors treating the injured here say most of the 100 patients treated so far are suffering not just smoke inhalation and eye damage, but fractures. Many of them have told the doctors that they were responding to the attack on the South Tower when they were suddenly trapped by the second explosion in the North Tower. And many of the fractures they're suffering come not from fallen debris, but from the concussive force of the explosion, which slammed them against walls, knocked them to the ground, or slammed them up against their own ambulance.
It was actually on the 78th floor of the second tower, and was evacuating the tower and experienced all these explosions.
But then when we got down to about 3, we heard like another explosion. I don't know what that was.
It just went ba-boom. It was like a bomb went off, and it was like holy hell coming down them stairs. And then when we finally got to the bottom, they were coming out on a mezzanine level there, and another explosion came right from it, just everyone flying.
And about an hour later after that, there was a huge explosion at the base of the South Tower. That's One World Trade Center, and part of the building collapsed.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, it was this big explosion.
There were numerous secondary explosions taking place in that building. There were continuous explosions.
We made it all the way downstairs,
And then when we were just about to come out of the building, there was another blast, and all the lights went out, and this is what happened then.
The glass came down?
We didn't see we were still inside the building. All we heard was a big blast, and the whole volume of air moved. And we came out through the subway.
But then there were other doors that were locked, so we were brought into another floor when there was another explosion, and they finally let us continue to go down.
People were experiencing secondary blasts in the stairwells the entire way down. And this is, of course, exactly where these blasts would be occurring in a controlled demolition, in the core of the building. And as you can see here, the stairwells were also in the core. And on top of all that, there was also further evidence from that day of an explosion on the B1 basement and lobby of Tower 1. That occurred, according to workers inside the building, simultaneously with the first plane, with some saying that the basement actually detonated first.
I went straight to the North Tower, to the basement number 1 of the North Tower. The building has 6 sub-levels of basement, B1, B2, all the way down to B6. And at 8:46, while we are on the basement, all of a sudden we hear boom, an explosion, very loud, very powerful, that lifted us up. The walls cracked, the false ceiling fell on top of us, the sprinkler system got activated, water started spewing everywhere, the fax machine fell on the floor, screaming, everybody's screaming. I thought one of the generators blew out from the mechanical room because it lifted us up. And when I went to verbalize it 6 to 7 seconds after, we hear, bah! All the way on the top of the building, 2 different events.
The explosion came from, I believe, at first we believed that it came from the mechanical room. And then we heard a series of other explosions that sounded up on the above levels of the building, to where we then realized that there was something wrong. The amount of explosions I've heard from 8:46 to the time we get out was so many, at least 10. It was just like multiple explosions, to where I felt like there was different grenades. That's what it sounded like. It was just different grenades being set off like in the building. It was like, there was one major explosion, and then there was different explosions throughout that period of time until we got out.
I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
I took the train, got out underneath. The smoke was in the train station. I worked down on B1 in the World Trade Center. What happened? And the whole place is filled up with smoke. I popped our ears. We couldn't hear anything down there.
The ladies that are with me were in the World Trade Center in the first building and escaped through the lobby, where they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
As we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
Pfeiffer was the first chief into the building. Right away, a guy from the Port Authority told him the damage was somewhere above the 78th floor. But all you had to do was look around. It was obvious. Something had happened right there in the lobby.
You just saw that all the windows were blown out. The lobby looked like the plane hit the lobby.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building. But then another plane hit the other building. But when I was coming through the doors on the other side of the Trade Center, either they blew the lobby up or something, because it blew the glass out of the doors and knocked us all down, and I got smoke and everything on me. I just feel a little shook up because I got blasted.
That's several accounts that the lobby blew up before the first plane, and that the subway was filled with smoke. How is this never mentioned? And what about the FDNY? According to the firefighters who were in the towers, there were bombs going off all over these buildings.
I demand to know, as should everyone, especially the media, why important testimony made that day from over 150 police, firefighters, and first responders regarding explosions wasn't included in the commission report, nor investigated further.
What happened?
It was an explosion. We was in the lobby, and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the...
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. Because we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking plane blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary?
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second it was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one.
There was explosions. I mean, there was a couple explosions.
Yeah, while we were in the building. We were wanted for stairwells.
A couple of times we dove into the stairway. We thought another plane was coming. We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
And you heard the boom, 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 boom.
New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. The explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
5 minutes and the elevators exploded on us. Yeah, we said something's wrong, yeah. I mean, the plane hit up on the 80th floor. I mean, in 5 minutes, all of a sudden now the elevator's exploding on the first level of the lobby.
There was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft that did not explode until an hour later.
It's undeniable. Explosives were planted in these buildings. Even the FBI was initially admitting this.
Federal agencies that were down there do believe that there was some sort of explosive device somewhere else besides the planes hitting.
I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area.
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time 2 planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed, but that is what the FBI is going on.
Of course it was their working theory. Literally every person in the building said there were detonations going off.
It sounded like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden 3 big explosions.
About 50 consecutive bangs, and it fell down like a waterfall.
Tower number 1, the second tower collapsed. It was the exact same series of detonations.
All of a sudden I looked up, and about 20 stories below, at least that's what it looked like to me, about 75 flights up below the fire, I saw from the corner, boom, 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 boom. Just like 20 straight hits just went down, and then I just saw the whole building just went, and as the bombs were going, people just started running, and I sat there and watched a few of them explode. I looked and I could see the corner, and it just started going pop. It just started going boom, 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 boom. And he goes, how fast? I go, like firecrackers.
You can observe detonations going off before the collapses, like this window blowing out, or this pre-explosion below the impact zone. You can observe them leading the collapse by about 10 floors or so, making the zero resistance of their free fall make sense. The notion of controlled demolition only became a taboo after the fact, as you can see, a sort of revisionist history in regards to 9/11. But on the day of, everybody knew it.
That was a bomb that did that.
Oh, God, look at that!
That was a fucking bomb that did that. There's no goddamn way that could have happened.
Okay, the second tower has gone down.
I'm not going any closer. They had it wired for explosives, obviously.
The tower would not have collapsed absent some tremendous trauma.
It could have been something that was planted.
Or a bomb planted in the building, yeah.
This defies belief.
We have a World Trade Center engineer who has a comment.
They're very strong buildings, as you remember from the blast the last time. So,
but what does it take as an engineer to do the thing? Oh no!
Let's get ready.
As this man is standing here saying they're very strong buildings and that he expected them to continue to stand, we in the background see the buildings collapse, which again feeds that feeling that there was something else, that there may have been something else that brought those buildings down.
There was a lot of talk there in New York of another explosion prior to the collapse of the first building.
I said, there's no way. That's a steel structure. That's just draperies and carpets and so on. And I didn't really finish that sentence. And right up at the top, like we were invited to watch, boom, 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 down it started to come.
I am reasonably sure that it was not the impact of the plane, the one that did this.
It didn't fall over. It looked as if somebody put TNT all throughout that building.
As if a demolition team set off when you see the old demolitions of these old buildings.
The way the towers collapsed seems similar to pictures we've become accustomed to watching, as old buildings like the Kingdome in Seattle are taken down with explosives.
This is clearly the way the structure is collapsing. This was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way.
I think it's safe to say there were bombs in these buildings. And this doesn't just go for Towers 1 and 2. It also goes for the often forgotten World Trade Center 7.
Well, me and Mr. Hesh, the corporation counsel, were on the 23rd floor. I told him we got to get out of here. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. And I turned to Hesh. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here.
The Red Cross rep was like, he goes over and he says, well, you got to stay behind this line because they're thinking about bringing the building down. They didn't say what building. They just said bringing a building down. He came back over with his hand over the radio, and what sounded like a countdown. And at the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1, and he was just saying, just run for your life, just run for your life. And then it was like another 2, 3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something.
You want to call your mother or something?
Somebody grabbed my shoulder and I started running, and the shit's hitting the ground behind me. And the whole time you're hearing boom, 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 boom. So I think I know an explosion when I hear it, you know? So yeah, I want to know what took that building down. I don't think it was a fire, and it certainly wasn't a plane.
Which brings us to World Trade Center 7. For you see, as I've alluded to throughout this video, there weren't 2 skyscrapers that came down in New York City on September 11th. There were 3. Tower 1, Tower 2, and 370 feet to the north, World Trade Center 7, or as it was locally known, the Salomon Brothers Building. Standing 47 stories high, World Trade Center 7 would be the tallest building in more than 30 states still to this day. Yet it is rarely even mentioned. World Trade Center 7 wasn't hit by a plane. It didn't have a huge hole blown into it. So how could it fall? In general speaking, the official explanation given in the government NIST report for the collapse of World Trade Center 7 is fire. That's right. Simply fire. Triggered a New York City skyscraper less than 15 years old, built with some of the highest building regulations in the world, to go into full failure collapse mode. Definitely not suspicious. But if you want to go into a little more detail, the NIST report goes like this. A fire on the 12th floor heated up beams G3005, A3004, B3004, C3004, and K3004, causing them to thermal expand to the west, pushing girder A2001 6 1/4 inches west, knocking it off its column seat at column 79, initiating an internal failure of 9 floors, which in turn caused the entire building to collapse. That is the official report of the collapse of World Trade Center 7. Leroy Halsey's Zilli Kwan and Feng Xiao's structural reevaluation of the collapse detail the many inaccuracies in the official NIST breakdown. For starters, NIST only shows thermal expansion in one direction, allowing for zero give on the outside of the building. This is not the case, as, of course, both sides of said beams would incur their thermal expansion. Furthermore, even when assuming the false notion of beams shifting in only one direction, they found that they still would have needed to increase the coefficient of thermal expansion of the steel by approximately 40% in order just to get them to move A2001 the 6¼ inches required for it to fall off its seat in the first place. Now, speaking of its seat, NIST also removed column 79 side plates, pictured here in the structurals, and confirmed to have been indeed added here in this 1986 footage of World Trade Center 7's construction, meaning that even if girder A2001 could be pushed with such a force, it couldn't move more than 3 5/8 inches anyway, for it would get wedged up against column 79's western side plate, making it impossible for it to slide off the way NIST claims. To add to even that, NIST simulations conveniently leave off girder A2001's web stiffeners, significantly decreasing the bending resistance of the flange. During their investigation, Halsey, Kwan, and Chow found that even if they removed the western column plate, set the beam to move solely west with zero give to the east, and added the 40% increase, that the web stiffeners alone were still enough to prevent the girders from walking off its seat. On top of all that, when calculating the thermal expansion of G3005, NIST conveniently leaves off connector beams S3007, G3007, and K3007, despite showing them in other areas of the report, which prevents the movement they are claiming to have happened as part of girder A2001's displacement. So in layman's terms, the driving force behind NIST theory is an impossibility. Architects and engineers then reconstructed World Trade Center 7 piece by piece digitally, using the structural blueprints, and then ran through simulation after simulation until they found one that resembled the actual collapse that we were able to observe of World Trade Center 7. They also inputted and simulated the alleged official NIST report's theory, in which the simulation tipped the building. This makes sense, as column 79 and girder A2001 were way over in the northeast corner of the building. If their failure had truly been the linchpin to Building 7's collapse, then it would make logical sense that at some point the building would tip east rather than flow straight down. Architects and engineers ran simulation after simulation until they finally got the one which resembled the actual collapse. And the only way they were able to get the simulation to accurately recreate what happened on that day was with the simultaneous failure of all core columns over 8 stories, followed 1.3 seconds later by the simultaneous failure of all exterior columns over 8 stories. Very much like a controlled demolition.
It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Also, you have owner Larry Silverstein in this interview actually saying that they gave the order to pull it.
I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Then you have the British Broadcasting World News Update reporting it as having collapsed already, when in fact it is right behind her. That's the Salomon Brothers building right there, better known as World Trade Center 7.
You might have heard a few moments ago was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were, and it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy.
Yeah, they're sketchy, all right, especially considering that it's still standing in the live shot behind you. Jane's feed would stay on the air with the Salomon Brothers building in the background for another 6 minutes. Until this happened.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Perhaps we can rejoin her and follow that up later.
Clearly, someone had advanced knowledge that this building was about to be brought down and jumped the gun. But going back to the structural reevaluation of World Trade Center 7, you'll find that when calculating the impact force of NIST's alleged falling girder A2001, even though, as we just went over, couldn't have happened anyway, the impact force it would crash into the 12th floor with works out to be 61,950 pounds, less than a tenth of the 632,000 pounds of force that would be required to shear the girder bearing seat below it, meaning that even if the impossible occurred and there were no connector beams, thermal expansion only happened in one direction, there were no web stiffeners, and the column 79 side plates magically disappeared, allowing girder A2001 to collapse onto the floor below, that still wouldn't even generate 10% of the force required to further collapse the floor below it, and it would have been contained right there on the 12th floor anyway. Yet, with all that in mind, on this day, despite not being hit by a plane, despite having no gaping hole, despite its beams being fireproofed, and the whole slew of other flaws in the NIST report, World Trade Center 7 also fell at free fall speed perfectly into its footprint, making it only the third steel building to ever collapse from fire alongside World Trade Center 1 and 2. The only 3 times in history, all in one day, all falling the exact same way, despite all 3 of them being damaged in 3 different ways. It's also of note that since only one other steel building has ever collapsed from fire, and that was in Iran, which, if you'll observe, falls much more realistically asymmetrically. Here's a side-by-side comparison. Which one does World Trade Center 7 resemble? I mean, how are we even still discussing this 2 decades later? You also have this interesting response from John Kerry when asked about Silverstein's statement that he gave the order to, quote, pull Building 7.
I do know that that wall, I remember, was in danger, and I think that they made a decision based on the danger that it had of destroying other things, that they did it in a controlled fashion.
Wow. It takes weeks to months to prepare such a demolition. The only way someone could make a decision to pull it and bring it down in a controlled fashion would be if they had already been pre-rigged for demo.
People realized that, this is probably something that was orchestrated.
And of course, everyone knew right away that it was terrorists. No need to do an investigation of more than, say, half a day. They found Satim al-Sakwami's passport on the street. So everything on the plane just exploded into a fireball the size of a giant stadium. But his passport somehow survived. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. He himself was incinerated to dust, but his passport remained fully intact and was found immediately.
Another development on Saturday, New York officials revealed at a news conference here in the city that a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
I actually can't believe that. Also, this is New York City. There are random papers and trinkets floating around the street at all times. It's normal place. Something like that wouldn't even stick out to someone, especially not in the ensuing chaos when everyone's eyes were focused 1,000 feet in the air on the hole in Tower 1. Now, a wheel? Sure. An engine, like the one seen flying off the plane here? Absolutely. But a random passport? Absolutely not. And again, the idea that one of the hijackers' passports survived this in the first place is laughably made up. They also claim to have found 2 passports in Shanksville. The plane and passengers, again, were completely obliterated, but 2 passports survived. No one thinks that's a little strange? Here's footage from the Nepal crash site of 2023. Luggage everywhere, debris everywhere, big sections of the plane, bodies, everything you'd expect from a crash site. Here's footage from the recent Cuban plane crash. Same thing. The India plane crash. Same thing. And here's Shanksville. A couple small fires and tiny metal scraps. No luggage. As this first responder remembers, no bodies.
And I just looked around and no people, and I'm thinking, where are the people?
And not a single section of the plane. But of course, these passports were touted as prime proof that this was indeed Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, a narrative they had been setting up all summer.
The intelligence community for some time has been warning in a steady drumbeat, Brian, that Osama bin Laden has not been heard from now, frankly, since the beginning of the year, the USS Cole incident, rather, and they've been wondering when and if he will strike again, and they only believed it was a matter of time. And I believe that today that is going to be their first suspicion, but we have no confirmation of that. I must underline, there's no confirmation that this is a terrorist attack, number one, or number two, that it's Osama bin Laden involvement. But I can tell you right now, that is what they are thinking. That is the working premise, and we'll just have to see as the day unfolds what they discover.
Among the key targets, key people that they're looking at is Osama bin Laden. It was just last Friday that the U.S. State Department put out a worldwide caution to American citizens traveling abroad and also to U.S. government facilities, and they said that terrorism knows no limits, whether it's on U.S. soil or outside.
The initial assumption, this official said, was that this had something to do, or at least they were looking into any possible connections with Osama bin Laden. The administration recently released a warning that they thought Osama bin Laden might strike out against U.S. targets.
Just like they had rehearsed 3 months earlier. Also, just like government whistleblower William Cooper had warned what would happen only 2 months earlier.
They're doing the same thing today with Osama bin Laden, and that's where I've been getting at. Can you believe what you have been seeing on CNN today, ladies and gentlemen? Can you believe it? Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him, went into Osama bin Laden's hideout, interviewed him and his top leadership, his top lieutenants and colonels and generals in their hideout. This is a CNN reporter with a camera crew. And he came out and told everybody, within 3 weeks, Osama bin Laden is going to attack the United States and Israel. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. Some doofus, jerk-off reporter with a camera crew bosses right into his hideout and interviews him. Now, that tells us two things. Either everyone in the intelligence community and all of the intelligence agencies of the United States government are blithering idiots and incompetent fools, including the entire apparatus of the FBI and all of their personnel, or they're lying to us. They're not looking for him at all. And the second is the truth. You see, the CIA created Osama bin Laden. They recruited him. They trained him. They found his leadership. They brought them all together. They showed them how to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and when that was over, they still continued to fund him and train him, and they're now using him to help bring about world government by making him the big boogeyman, because they can't use Saddam Hussein anymore. Did you ever hear of Osama bin Laden before you heard of Saddam Hussein? When did you start hearing of Osama bin Laden? It was after Saddam Hussein and Iraq were supposedly neutralized in the Gulf War, because they needed a new boogeyman. But they're not looking for Osama bin Laden, because I'm telling you right now, if I were the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, within 2 weeks I would have him dead or in custody without fail. A reporter from CNN and his little camera crew got in to Osama bin Laden's secret hideout and conducted an interview. If you don't believe me, tune into CNN. They're probably running it right now as I'm speaking. And if you believe it, you are one of the stupidest jerks that ever lived on the face of this earth. And whatever is going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it.
Wow. That was 2 months before September 11th. And wouldn't you know it, Bill Cooper was killed in his own driveway just 2 months after that. Interesting that the most famous government whistleblower of all time, author of the book Behold the Pale Horse, warns people, remarkably, about 9/11 just 2 months before 9/11 and winds up being killed by law enforcement immediately after 9/11. Now, was Cooper a prophet? No. He was simply someone with former Q clearance who knew how covert government operations worked. So when he saw CNN talking about bin Laden, playing Baqir Yanni's interview, where they were allowed to just waltz right into Al-Qaeda's secret hideout, followed by a warning of an imminent attack, he knew exactly what he was watching. He was watching one of the most integral parts of any of these operations, making sure the public knows who the bad guy is. It's False Flag 101. They were reseeding bin Laden's name into the mind's eye of society. In order to sell bin Laden as the perpetrator, the public first needs to know that he is already an enemy. Cooper knew this concept well. It's something that has preceded almost every war of the 20th century. It's an archetype. First you build them, then you let them loose, then you expose them, followed typically by a well-timed traumatic event, and then you wage war on them. He knew the next round was coming. We had just went through this same cycle with Saddam Hussein. First, we built him in Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war, funding them, giving them technology, and overall aiding him as he waged open chemical warfare on Iran. Then, once we were done with him, we exposed him to the public as a monster, and then we waged war on him. Once you know how these people operate, it becomes easier to read their moves. And like William Cooper stated during his now famous June 2001 broadcast, we also built up bin Laden. Because from 1979 to 1992, in a campaign called Operation Cyclone, the CIA funded the Mujahideen. The CIA's prized asset during this time was Mujahideen commander Jalaluddin Haqqani, close friend and mentor of Osama bin Laden. He is the Mujahideen commander who personally helped and protected Osama bin Laden during his rise. Haqqani received his assets, like the rest, through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, as this was the office used by the CIA to get their funding to the Mujahideen. But due to his, quote, prized asset status, he also received additional payments direct from the CIA's operatives themselves. This is the man who took Osama bin Laden under his wing and mentored him, funded directly by the CIA. British Foreign Secretary from 1997 to 2001, Robin Cook, further clarifies that specifically throughout the 80s, bin Laden was armed by the CIA, and that, quote, Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally the computer file of the thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with help from the CIA. Al-Qaeda was the CIA's mujahideen recruitment database. Incredible. Bin Laden himself even admits this in a 1995 interview, where he states, quote, I created my first military camps where these volunteers underwent training by Pakistani and American officers, and that the arms were supplied by the Americans and the money by the Saudis. 1995. This group was bin Laden's Maktab al-Khidmat, and they were nurtured by Pakistan's Internal Services Intelligence Agency, the CIA's primary conduit to the Mujahideen during Operation Cyclone. The Mujahideen is what split into Al-Qaeda, as we just went over, and the Taliban. We helped build them. And bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, and the Taliban were bad guys 1, 2, and 3 in kicking off the new never-ending war in the Middle East. All at one time funded by the United States government through the CIA.
They say the casualties from this one are going to be so much worse. They are ready to go to war. There is a sense of war here at the Pentagon.
And thank you very much, John McWethy at the Pentagon. We'll be coming back to you many times in the course of the evening. The question is, go to war with whom? Because from the FBI, from the CIA, from the Pentagon today, no warning of this whatsoever, no knowledge of who's involved. No warning of this whatsoever, no knowledge of who's involved.
The intelligence community for some time has been warning.
The U.S. State Department put out a worldwide caution.
The administration recently released a warning that they thought Osama bin Laden might strike out against U.S. targets.
If you think the idea of our own government lying to us to generate support for a war is impossible, they've literally done it so many times. President Wilson commissioned an entire council in World War I dedicated to propaganda, which circulated monstrous imagery and invented horrible stories of the German people, all with the sole intention to make American citizens beg him to enter the war. It worked, and they did.
This propaganda they told us about him killing women and children and one thing and another. They had a lot of propaganda about that there. The Hun, you know, they called him. And how he'd go through these villages when he'd capture them and kill all the people off and that there. That's the stuff that they told us. To feed you up to get you mad, I guess.
Atrocities alleged to have been committed by the Germans in Belgium were presented in melodramatic form.
The evil Germans threw the babies on the floor and left them to die. We'll flash back to this in a moment. The Woodrow Wilson administration's Committee on Public Information brought advertisers, graphic artists, newspaper editors, novelists, and more together for a 2-year media campaign. George Creel headed the operation. Edward Bernays, the future father of public relations, chaired the CPI export service, and Hollywood itself got right to work making propaganda films, all to sell the Great War. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, August 4th, 1964, U.S. military vessels openly attacked by the North Vietnamese. President Johnson gave a public address explaining it to the nation. And on the heels of the public's outrage, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution signed by Congress, allowing President Johnson to deploy U.S. forces to Vietnam for open warfare. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was made up. It never even happened. The National Security Agency had deliberately skewed intelligence at President Johnson's request to create the impression that an attack had been carried out, leading to literal Vietnam. Still think it's impossible? In the lead up to the first Gulf War, a young girl named Naira, last name redacted for safety, of course, came forward with the harrowing tale of Iraqi soldiers coming into Kuwaiti hospitals, taking the babies out of their incubators, and putting them on the ground to die. Look familiar? Naira presented this as an official testimony to Congress.
The second week after invasion, I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital,
with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor. It was horrifying.
Public reaction naturally was one of pure anger. The incubator babies. President Bush came on TV and repeated it to the nation like a rallying call. And 3 months later, with the public now fully on board, Bush initiated open warfare in Operation Desert Storm. Off to fight literal monsters once again. Naira's testimony was made up. It never even happened. Naira's name, as it turns out, wasn't redacted for safety, but because she was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, who also testified at this same hearing. Naira's testimony was fabricated and coached by the American public relations firm Hill & Knowlton. So, the idea of a distressingly emotional incident being orchestrated by the powers that be in order to initiate a war is actually more common than not. And in one such case, even in writing. Preserved forever in the Operation Northwoods document, a plan to remove Fidel Castro and overthrow the Cuban government. Born out of the failure of the Bay of Pigs, the main operation was dubbed Mongoose, and it included the CIA, the Department of Defense, the State Department, the FBI, and more. Within 4 months of its inception, early March 1962, a memorandum titled Northwoods is drawn up detailing a list of false flags to, quote, justify U.S. military intervention in Cuba. So it is documented fact that our intel communities plan false flag attacks. There's no disputing this. It's in writing. Northwoods proposed using actors to fake attacks, stage riots, and in one scenario, stage a new Remember the Maine incident by blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blaming Cuba. Sound familiar?
Aggression by terror against the peaceful villagers of South Vietnam has now been joined by open aggression on the high seas against the United States of America. I have been given encouraging assurance by these leaders of both parties that such a resolution will be promptly introduced, freely and expeditiously debated, and passed with overwhelming support.
Hey, seems that one was a keeper. But it's page 10 that is too familiar to ignore. It's here the Northwoods first suggests, quote, hijacking attempts against civil air and the painting of a drone plane as an exact duplicate of a civil airliner to be used in a false flag attack. Documented fact. In this exercise, the actual civil airliner would be loaded up with selected passengers with carefully prepared aliases. They would then launch both the civil airliner and the painted drone at the perfect time for both of their flight paths to rendezvous south of Florida, where the civil airliner would then descend to a minimum altitude as the drone would take over its flight path. So on radar, the drone would appear to still be the civil airline. It's right after this where they would then put out a mayday to grab everyone's attention.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. The
plan was to destroy it on call for all the airwaves to hear and many to see. A public act of war. It further states that doing it this way would allow the radio stations to tell the U.S. what happened, rather than the U.S. trying to, quote, sell it themselves. They wanted the people who witnessed it to sell the public, not the government.
I mean, it was a terrorist attack. It had to be.
It's only struck one of the buildings. The other building appears to not have been... Holy fuck! shit!
It's an international tourist place. Lots of people. There's not a plane coming down. You see? Boom!
Oh, man. What the fuck's going on?
Wow.
Oh, shit.
Wow. Do you see this aircraft?
I've got it all.
Yo, what the fuck? Yo, that's terrorist shit, bro.
That is it.
This is terrorist.
That's
Obviously. Wait. Oh my god!
What?
Oh my god! It's terrorist activity! What do we do? Mom, another plane just crashed into the other World Trade Center. Another plane hit it. A jumbo jet. I'm so scared. I'm leaving. No, don't make it.
Holy shit, man. That's the other building. That's terrorist.
Other building?
That's terrorist, bro. That's fucking terrorist.
Holy shit!
Oh my god. That's terrorist, bro.
They just shut out. Did you get that?
I zoomed out on it.
President Kennedy rejected Northwoods, and that is the only reason it did not happen. So, to suggest that our own government wouldn't stage a public tragedy with alleged hijacked planes in order to justify, quote, U.S. military intervention in a country the CIA was already running missions in is an indefensible position. They quite literally were one signature away from doing exactly that in 1962 in writing, a hauntingly similar to 9/11 incident born out of a program that had nearly the entire government on board, essentially mimicking the very event that, as predicted, made us beg for war in the Middle East, that gave the CIA the full military intervention they were lobbying for before the September 11th attacks. Mimicking it, in my opinion, right down to the painted drone planes. Because I noticed something going through the immediate coverage and home videos of September 11th. Nearly every single early eyewitness refers to those planes as 737s or smaller, not 767s as stated in the official narrative.
I just witnessed a plane that appeared to be cruising slightly lower than normal altitude over New York City, and it appears to have crashed into, I don't know which tower it is, but it hit directly in the middle of one of the World Trade Center towers.
Sean, what kind of plane? Was it a small plane, a jet?
It was a jet. Looked like a two-engine jet, maybe a 737.
Can you tell us what kind of an airplane is it?
It had to be a 737 and had to hit the World Trade Center.
And a 737 hit the World Trade Center. And I was just curious at the same time if that was the aircraft.
It just seemed like a smaller plane. I don't think it was anything commercial.
A possible 737 jet may have crashed into World Trade Center Tower number 1. This just happened, folks. You're looking live.
A plane, possibly a 737 jet, hit Tower 1 of the World Trade Center in the financial district.
I just heard somebody say that they thought it was a 737 that went through the building.
It's speculated that the plane is as big as a 737.
Not a big plane like an airliner, but not a tiny propeller plane either. A small jet plane.
Now I was told the 737 jet hit the building all the way up. The flames are still coming out of the Trade Center on the top.
Yeah, it was a jet, a small jet, like a private jet or something.
Also, more eyewitnesses saying they saw a small commuter plane crash into the building.
Right now we're getting information, Al, that it was a small commuter plane.
The plane looked either like a 737 or an Airbus.
737 or an Airbus. Okay,
Yeah.
And I understand you're an airplane aficionado?
Yeah.
Some reports are that it was a small commuter plane.
It was a plane? It was definitely a plane?
They said a 737 plane. They have some guy on the phone who said it was either a 737 or an Airbus. He witnessed the whole thing.
Your estimation, what type of plane did
Either
you
an
report
Airbus A320 style or a Boeing 737.
Were many people in the building?
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very...
Oh, the 737 went right in.
As I was walking down Fifth Avenue, which is close to our studios, and I heard a jet, perhaps a 737 or a small Airbus.
Did you see the 747? It was a 737. 737.
Some guy standing next to me said, "Oh my God, that was like a Lear jet that just hit it."
Did you just see that? I mean, it was a 737. The guy just took a 737 and he flew it right into the building. Who went up?
It was a small commercial aircraft, like a small Airbus or a 737 Boeing.
One was hit by an aircraft. Some witnesses saying it was a 727 or 737.
That's obviously designed to do considerable damage to those buildings on this day when we're holding a primary election in New York City.
Now, I would imagine... Ollie?
Jim, what you're saying could be a drone aircraft. That's an aircraft that's guided electronically to its target without having a pilot. Now, that is a possibility as well.
It's a 737, we're now being told.
That is clearly, from the indications I'm looking at, is a small jet, small airliner-sized jet. Looks to me either an A320 or a 737 size airplane.
Looked like a Boeing 737.
The reports that suggested it was perhaps a 737.
It looked to be a small, commercial plane, the first plane that I saw, a commercial airline, a mid-size, not a jumbo jet.
I'm just getting message from one of our employees here at MSNBC whose husband, and we hope to get him on the phone, saw this. He said it looked to him like it was a 737.
My guess is what we saw there was an A320. That's just my guess.
Didn't seem like a big passenger jet. It was a smaller type plane. It definitely did not look like a commercial plane. I didn't see any windows on the side.
Those could be cargo planes.
We were en route to the scene, and an airplane passed over our head from south to north, and this was a Boeing 737 aircraft.
I saw it for a fraction of a second, but it appeared to me to be a 737 would be the most likely candidate.
Yeah, that certainly is what it looked like.
The first plane appeared to be a 737. The plane we saw, absent any perspective, seemed to be a smaller plane.
Let us go to Richard Thompson on the telephone. He is a licensed pilot, and he witnessed this.
It was a small business jet of some type.
The engine configuration looked like it was a 737.
What's reported, at least, as a 737 type size airplane.
The second plane hit the Tower 2. Looked like a 737.
Some witnesses saying that they saw one of the planes, I believe the DC-3, or maybe it was a smaller plane. I think it was a smaller plane.
They compared it to the size of a shuttle, like the Boston or Washington shuttle.
Was it a large aircraft?
It looked fairly large. I didn't think it looked as large as I'm hearing it probably was. I thought it was a small jet. It sounds like maybe it was larger than I thought.
Well, but you were the eyewitness.
I mean, that's not just a few people. That's damn near everybody. Even going so far as to argue people down who so much as even suggest a 747. Furthermore, we even have some channels caught trying to hide these statements, such as the official CBS YouTube editing out yet another eyewitness account here.
Yes, that was definitely looked like it was on purpose.
You saw a plane?
Yes, I just saw a plane go into the building.
Why do you say that was definitely on purpose?
Because it just flew straight into it. Looks like it's about, I would say 15 floors lower than the first building.
Nose to cut? Of course you didn't. That's the point. Now let's listen to the full broadcast.
You saw a plane?
Yes, I just saw a plane go into the building.
Why do you say that was definitely on purpose?
Because it just flew straight into it. It didn't look like it was, and it didn't look like a commercial jet. It was a smaller plane. It was definitely a smaller plane.
Can you characterize the scene down there right now for us?
Now, on the...
Yeah, as you can look down to the street.
Yes.
From your vantage point?
On the second building, I think that the further one, the east side, there it looks like it's about, I would say 15 floors lower than the first building.
The entire statement left in full, except the part where she says it was a smaller plane. Clearly, someone made the decision to edit this out. So I decided to take it a step further. Step 1, create a scale. Using the typical floor plans of Tower 1, I set the scale at 207 feet 2 inches. This line right here represents the alleged hijacked 767's overall length, and this range right here represents the size of the plane cited by nearly every eyewitness. I then gathered as many clear straight-on shots of Flight 175 hitting the South Tower as I could find, stopping each one as close as possible to the tower for maximum accuracy. As you can see here, this set of shots covers the full spectrum, from slightly south to slightly north. Due to the angle that Flight 175 hits Tower 2, the shots taken from the southeast perspective will scale the plane as slightly larger than it actually is due to two variables: the plane being closer than the building, and due to the angle lining up more straight with the plane, but not with the tower from which we're setting the scale off of. As you'll observe, even with these variables in its favor, Flight 175 still scales short of the proposed 767. Conversely, the shots from the northeast perspective will show it slightly shorter. There's one, and there's two, both scaling to a 737. And finally, an angle with as close on of a shot as there is, also scaling to a large 737. Running the gamut and showing that every last one scales shorter than the 767 they claim it is. The planes that hit the Twin Towers were not the ones that were hijacked. We know they look like the ones that were hijacked.
An American Airlines jet hit the tower. I know about planes.
No, United. It was a United. It was a United. It was a United airplane that just crashed right into it.
An aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft, straight from our own government's writings. And of course they were drones. They hit their target dead on. You're telling me that alleged hijackers with minimal flight training who supposedly could barely fly Cessnas were able to perfectly navigate full-size passenger jets 100 miles off course without help from a tower and hit their targets dead on 3 times. There is no way. Which brings us back to Amalgam Virgo. Because if you were going to orchestrate a false flag the level of Operation Northwoods or 9/11, you would need drive runs. Bush said he was formulating a plan to take out Al-Qaeda once and for all that they, quote, developed over the spring and summer. Coincidentally, the same time this simulation is set up. A much-needed dry run. Even if the majority of people involved have no idea it's for a real event, you still need to be able to conduct a high-end run-through. And that's what NORAD seems to have done just 3 months before it happened. Here is the PDF of the earlier mentioned Amalgam Virgo. Again, with a picture of Osama bin Laden preparing to use drone planes to commit a terrorist act. This fictional drone plane attack is also taking place not in an overseas embassy, not on a ship, not on a military base, but on a U.S. city. And as you scroll down, you will observe the chilling similarities as nearly every mock-up shows a drone plane flying over a body of water towards the city. When you get to page 22 in the corner, you have a drone next to a city with what looks like exploding skyscrapers. Page 23, the same thing. And to top even that off, you finally have the track synopsis on page 31. If you come to the bottom corner, it states that the UAVs, or drones, are color-coded red. And what are the 2 UAVs on this map? 9 and 11, with 9 circled with dots. And what's the highlighted UAV 9's time frame? 8:30 to 9:30 local, the exact time both planes hit the towers, 8:46 and 9:03. I'm sure that's just a coincidence, though, that NORAD conducted a simulation of Osama bin Laden flying drone planes into buildings, with the first two drone designations being 9 and 11, with the attached exact time designation window only 3 months before. Definitely just a coincidence. And again, these are their own documents. The events of 9/11 have been covered by 10,000 journalists since it's happened. Surely some of them must have read the Amalgam Virgo PDF. Or what about the, quote, official investigation? Speaking of such, might also surprise you to find out that the FBI director at the time of 9/11 was none other than Robert Mueller, who was appointed just 1 week before the attacks, who then conducted an investigation that went on for years and led nowhere. Sound familiar? That investigation, by the way, or should I say the FBI investigation into the September 11th attacks, is codenamed Pent Bomb, short for Pentagon Twin Towers Bombing Investigation. Not Twin Towers Hijacking Investigation, not Twin Towers Jet Fuel Investigation, Twin Towers Bombing Investigation. Bomb. Robert Mueller was also one of the main voices behind the now proven false declaration of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
I am concerned always about the threat of WMD attack on the United States. Our particular concern is that Saddam Hussein may supply terrorists with biological, chemical, or radiological material.
Even worse than Mueller was another familiar name, one James Clapper, who, as the director of NIMA, the National Imagery and Mapping Agency, was the main person tasked with analysis of Iraqi satellite imagery to determine whether or not WMD sites existed. NIMA claimed to have located more than 950 WMD sites, which went on to serve as key evidence behind the WMD lie. Colin Powell then used NEMA's generated graphics of the alleged mobile biological production facilities to give an impassioned briefing to the United Nations. And immediately following that, as we just watched, George Tenet and Robert Mueller confidently amplified the WMD hysteria to Congress for the final stamp of approval. 1 month later, we invaded Iraq. And 2 years after that, and Iraq's complete dismantling, it was concluded that there actually weren't weapons of mass destruction. As it turns out, the satellite images Clapper's NEMA used to validate the claims of the alleged mobile biological production facilities were, in fact, milk pasteurization trucks. Starting to see a pattern yet?
Terror against the peaceful villagers of South Vietnam.
Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
That's the stuff that they told us, to feed you up to get your mad, I guess.
And where did the FBI's top anti-terrorism task force just happen to be on 9/11? About as far away from New York as they could be.
But this very interesting information, Katie, Matt, and Tom, from the FBI, they had been operating a massive exercise from their hostage rescue unit. All of their top teams, about 50 personnel, helicopters, equipment, were in Monterey, California for the last 2 days, scheduled to fly back today commercially. So all of those people are out of place. It's fair to say, according to sources that we've talked to here at NBC, that the FBI rescue operations and other FBI operations are really in chaos right now because they can't reach their officials in New York. All of their phone lines are down, and now you've got all of their special experts on this stuck in Monterey, California, trying to get a military flight back because there are no longer commercial flights. So they are seriously out of pocket, and there is a real breakdown of the FBI anti-terror coordination team, which is, of course, the principal team that would lead any effort and was so effective under Jim Costa.
Our intelligence stunk this time. Put it this way, it was so bad that the FBI's anti-terrorist task force responsible for investigating situations like this was on a training exercise in Monterey, California at the time of the bombing and still can't get back to investigate it.
That's okay, though. Fortunately for the FBI, their anti-terrorism task force didn't need to be there right away to solve the case, because the case solved itself. In an act of miraculous fortune, one passenger's luggage somehow was never transferred to its respective doomed flight, which, when searched, just so happened to contain written out breakdowns of all 19 hijackers, their backgrounds, their motives, each of their assignments, their ties to Al-Qaeda, a video cassette of a Boeing flight simulator, a knife, and pepper spray. The entire plot of 9/11 is neatly packaged and dropped in their lap. Of all the passengers in all the planes, the one suitcase that just so happened to not make the plane has a written out breakdown of the attacks. Give me a break. I call this one the Magic Suitcase, which, when coupled with the Magic Passports, you get the FBI's official reasoning when asked how on earth they were instantly able to discern all of the hijackers and how they were attached to Al-Qaeda. That is some stroke of luck. And what about the alleged hijackers? The majority of them, 11 to be precise, obtained their visas through the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. This is notable because according to J. Michael Springman, former head of the Visa Bureau in Jeddah, this was the very consulate the CIA used throughout the 80s and 90s to obtain visas for their newly recruited Arab assets. Springman states that while head of the Visa Bureau from 87 to 89, he was consistently ordered by CIA higher-ups to push through visas. Springman also stated that while your typical Foreign Service post would be comprised of roughly a third of intel officers, that the consulate in Jeddah was at least 50%, if not more. One notable CIA agent stationed in this very consulate in Jeddah from 1982 to 1984, the heart of Operation Cyclone, was none other than John Brennan. John Brennan would later go on to become the chief of station responsible for overseeing and managing all CIA intelligence operations in all of Saudi Arabia from 1996 to 1999. Right as the 9/11 hijacker visa operation was getting underway. Is it all starting to come together now? Furthermore, in even another all too on-the-nose coincidence, on the morning of September 11th, officials at the National Reconnaissance Office, the agency charged with operating our nation's spy satellites, had an exercise scheduled in which a small corporate jet would crash into their building. The National Reconnaissance Office draws its personnel straight from the military and CIA. I believe these drills, along with the FBI being scheduled on the other end of the country and NORAD being scheduled for drills up in Alaska and Canada, were designed to handicap response time and hinder the initial investigation. I believe that's also why World Trade Center 7 was taken out, to cripple the on-site operating center. Because World Trade Center 7 wasn't just any office building. It housed, among other things, the SEC, the IRS, Secret Service, the Office of Emergency Management, the Department of Defense, and the CIA. Taking out Building 7 was crucial to muddying up the investigation process. Because as we've gone over consistently in this video, many things from the in real-time coverage do not line up with the official narrative. Like, for instance, FDNY Battalion Chief Oriel Palmer, who was able to take an elevator to the 41st floor and then use the south stairwell to make it up to the 78th floor, the site of impact.
Hey, 9415, we got two isolated pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with two lines. Where you go to 78th floor, numerous 1045, call one. What stair are you in, Oriel? South stairway, Adam. South tower. I'm going to need 3 firefighters. Adam, stairway to knock down 2 fires. We got a house line stretch. We can hit some water on it, knock it down, okay? All right, that's all. We're coming up with there. Go on 77 now in the B stair. I'll be right to you.
Just 2 isolated pockets of fire that they can knock down with 2 lines. Boy, that sure paints a different picture than what we've been led to believe. Just minutes after this narrative-damning communication, the South Tower would explode into a near free-fall collapse. How's that for timing?
Then what plan to take down a building? Boom, 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 boom.
This defies belief.
We can say that again. Speaking of defying belief, you have the most remarkable piece regarding Silverstein. Yes, even more remarkable than him admitting to giving the order to pull it and then watching Building 7 fall. For you see, Larry Silverstein had a meeting every single morning in the World Trade Center at Windows of the World. Right here. Right on the floors that were completely cut off from escape. He had a morning meeting there every single weekday. Except for 9/11.
Where were you on September 11th?
I was home. And the only reason I wasn't where I was every morning, subsequent to the 26th day of July, my mornings were spent usually at a breakfast meeting at Windows, an 8 o'clock breakfast meeting, Windows, the top of it, right? And then going down to visit with my tenants, my new tenants, at the Trade Center, getting to know them, understanding their problems and so forth, ascertaining how we could service their needs better, which is one of the first things you do when you acquire a property. You begin to meet your tenants and start talking with them. And so my mornings were spent at the Trade Center, and then by noon I was back uptown. And so that particular morning, because I have light-colored hair and fair skin, and I'm an annuity to the dermatologist, my wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I remember dressing to go to the doctor, and finally saying to my wife, I said, sweetheart, I've got so much to do downtown. I got to cancel this. I've got to go downtown. And she said, you're not going to cancel this appointment. You're going to the dermatologist. And, having been married now to the same woman for 46 years, you get this sense of determination on occasion, their voices. And I said, okay, yes, dear, I'll go. I'll go. And then just minutes later, received a telephone call to turn on a television set and witnessed this horrendous circumstance. The first plane hitting, and then the second plane hitting. Of course, with the second hit, it became obvious that this was terrorism. But thereafter was absolute hell.
Well, what are the odds of that? It's also of note that in May of 2001, the Port Authority lost their lawsuit against former insurers to have them foot the bill for the hundreds of millions of dollars it was going to cost to remove asbestos from the World Trade Center complex. Nevertheless, Larry, who already owned World Trade Center 7, still worked to beat out Vornado for it, knowing that this asbestos price tag would lie on him. Fortunately for Larry and Silverstein Properties, and thanks to the attacks, it would be the insurance companies who would have to pay after all. And since there were 2 attacks instead of 1, they were able to argue above the insurance payout cap of $3.55 billion to $4.6 billion. Over $1.3 billion more than they had just acquired the complex for from the Port Authority in July. Instead of having to pay hundreds of millions, they made $1.3 billion. That was a very fortunate trip to the doctors. Next up, you have FEMA worker Tom Kenny being interviewed about the horrors he had seen during the cleanup, where he states, curiously enough, that he arrived the night before 9/11.
Looking at it, and based on your experience, is this likely to take a month, 2 months, longer? What's your own personal estimate?
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site other than the spot at Church and Day to which we were deployed.
So let's just think about this for a second. FEMA arrived in New York Monday night. And we know he's definitely talking about Monday the 10th and not Monday the 17th, because if you go to the source broadcast of this interview and rewind, you'll see that it was on the 13th. And he wasn't just a day off and misspoke thinking it was Wednesday, because he would have said yesterday morning. But instead, he specifically says Tuesday morning. Somebody knew this was going to happen. Another curious slip-up came just 2 months following the attacks, during the town hall when President Bush had this to say about Flight 11.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot.
This one's a particularly interesting statement, being that no footage of the first plane existed until the day after 9/11, when the FDNY revealed that they had just happened to be out filming that morning and caught it on tape.
The fire department was sitting here all morning. Yeah, I saw right there. And I was wondering what they doing. And I said, what is the fire department just sitting there for? That's what I'm thinking. Is it a conspiracy? Is that boom?
This footage would remain the only known video of the first plane until later on when this video caught the sound.
What the hell was that?
It sounded like a plane crash.
There was a reaction on the part of...
Yo, close to you!
Come to us, come to us!
And this one caught the impact. To this day, these three videos along with these three pictures are the only recorded footage of the alleged Flight 11. So, it would have been impossible for Bush to, quote, have seen the first plane on TV before entering the classroom. And what happened right after September 11th? They signed the Patriot Act, taking away everyone's privacy. The Patriot Act is often presented as a bill created urgently in the response to 9/11, much like the hunt for bin Laden or the U.S. in Afghanistan. But this is also not the case. The Patriot Act was actually mostly drafted already by Joe Biden in 1994.
Right after 1994, and you can ask the Attorney General this because I got a call when he introduced the Patriot Act. He said, Joe, I'm introducing the act basically as you wrote it in 1994. It was defeated then not by any liberals. It was defeated then by the folks who worried that we'd have the Minutemen would get in trouble, by the Mr. Barrs of the world who were worried about the right wing, not anything else. So just that has nothing to do with you all, but just to set the record straight. Almost the same thing that got passed, the Patriot Act, was introduced by me in 1994.
It wasn't able to pass. This time, however, it went through with not even a second thought. It's interesting because all these things were sold as knee-jerk byfactors of the attacks on September 11th. But in reality, they were all already in the works. So quick recap, Joe Biden is the one who drafted the Patriot Act. James Clapper was behind the WMDs, and Robert Mueller is the FBI director who conducted the 9/11, quote, investigation that led nowhere. It's funny because all I ever hear about are the Bush connections. It's almost as if they're controlled by the same people. And speaking of the vast array of coincidences concerning 9/11 and political figures on the other side of the typical 9/11 aisle, September 11th included a silver lining for the Clintons, as their most public enemy, political researcher Barbara Olson, had been booked that morning aboard Flight 77. She was on a promotion tour for the upcoming sequel to her scathing Hillary Clinton hit piece, Hell to Pay, in which she was set to present her deep dive on the Clinton White House. On September 11th, Barbara was scheduled to appear on Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher, and the rest is history. Barbara's upcoming book, titled Final Days, was released posthumously. Barbara was also married to Theodore Olson, the Bush administration's lead counsel in Bush vs. Gore. According to Theodore and his secretary, Barbara called him 2 times during the flight at the DOJ. He claims she called around 9:15 and then shortly thereafter to inform him that the plane had been hijacked.
Barbara was had changed her flight because that September 11 unfortunately was my birthday, and so she changed her flight to be there the night before, and so she got on this flight from Dulles Airport to Los Angeles. She was going to be on the Bill Maher show that night. And when the news came in, I was in the Justice Department, the Solicitor General's office. My secretary rushed in, and we turned on the television set, and we saw the film that was coming in over the the networks of the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Center, and then the second, and I can't remember the exact sequence, but somewhere around 9:15 or something like that, my secretary rushed in and said Barbara's on the phone. I don't know how Barbara managed to make her cell phone work, or make the cell phones. In those days you could make phone calls, but they were up in the air, and I had worried as soon as I saw this tragedy unfolding that maybe Barbara's flight was one of the ones that had been flown into the World Trade Center. And so when my secretary said she was on the phone, I thought, oh my God, Barbara's okay. That isn't what's happening. And then she got on the phone and she told me that their plane had been hijacked and that all the passengers had been moved to the back of the airplane.
It seems Theodore makes a good point. How did Barbara get her cell phone to work? At the time of the calls, American Airlines Flight 77 was at an altitude of 25,000 feet. Tests to this day show cell phone reception capping out at around 10,000 feet. There's no way her cell phone worked at that altitude, especially in 2001 when there were so few cell towers. They literally had ad campaigns where people would walk around normal cities saying, "Can you hear me now?" So the answer to this, I think, absolutely relevant question of the magic cell phones has become airphones. When you ask a question about one of the many phone calls made from the hijacked planes, you will typically receive a snarky, condescending retort of airphones. Yes, many airplanes did in fact have airphones at this time. But to act like mentioning cell phones is absurd is in fact absurd in itself. The theory of airphones was added after 9/11. A revisionist history. The original reporting is what called them cell phones, not us.
Passengers on two different flights, we're now learning. The United flight that went into the World Trade Tower, as well as the flight that went into the Pentagon. Cell phone calls from passengers on both those flights.
From a cell phone call aboard the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania.
A passenger on the plane told an emergency dispatcher in a cell phone call.
She did get off a phone call to her husband on the cell phone.
Tonight we're getting reports of cell phone calls from at least 3 of those 4 flights. There was a flight attendant who apparently got a cell phone call off. There was a businessman who got off 2 cell phone calls.
Everywhere you looked, they were talking about cell phones, not just calls, cell phone calls. It was even in print. Cell phone calls carried message of terror. Several people used cell phones Tuesday to describe the hijackings. A few people on the hijacked planes managed to make cell phone calls. The harrowing cell phone calls from hijacked victims. She made 2 cell phone calls to him before the jet crashed. She was able to call her husband from the plane on a cell phone and tell him that she loved him. One man aboard United Airlines Flight 93 called 911 from a bathroom using a cell phone. It was one of at least 4 cell phone calls made from the doomed aircraft. Cell phone calls made by passengers to relatives shortly before the crash suggested they planned to wrest control of the jet from hijackers. Barbara Olson called twice on her cell phone to describe the hijacking to her husband. Cell phones allowed hijacked victims to say final goodbyes. So at the very least, it's not ridiculous to think that these calls may have actually been made from cell phones. And if so, that means they could not have been made from the air, which again is yet another arrow pointing directly to Operation Northwoods. The passenger carrying aircraft will descend to a minimum altitude and go directly into an auxiliary field at Eglin Air Force Base, where arrangements will have been made to evacuate the passengers. Which brings us to Flight Attendant C.C. Lyle's call to her husband.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that I love them very much. And I'm so sorry, babe. I don't know what to say. There's 3 guys. They've hijacked the plane. I'm trying to be calm. We're turned around, and I've heard that there's planes that's been flown into the World Trade Center. I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
End of message.
It's a frame after telling him to listen carefully. And also, if you'll notice, there's no background noise. Here's unamplified video taken from the back of a commuter jet. Now here's Cece's call.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully.
Nothing. The tape hiss from her husband's answering machine is louder than her background. This call was also from Cece's cell phone.
It was about like 9:30. I guess that's when the call started. Then I guess I didn't answer the phone until the last time she called, which was, I think it was like 9:51 or something to that. It was towards almost close to 10 o'clock by that time. And then that's when I get the phone call from her, and I actually had a chance to speak with her. Once the phone got disconnected, then I sat up in the bed because I did all this laying down. I sat up in the bed it was like I just woke up. I'm like, was that a real call? So I looked at the caller ID and noticed that it was a call, and it was from her cell phone. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. How can she call me from on the plane from a cell phone? Because cell phones don't work on the plane.
Cece's call took place at 9:47, which means she would have been at 20,000 feet. How could she make that call unless on the ground? Thomas Burnett's wife, Dina, said she also knew he was using a cell phone because of caller ID. Jeremy Glick's wife wrote in her deposition that she also couldn't hear any unusual sounds and that the connection was very clear, quote, as if he was calling from the next room. And as for Theodore Olson changing his tune from cell phones to earphones, it's noteworthy that in 2002, as Solicitor General in the Supreme Court case of Christopher versus Harbury, Olson maintained that the government had an inherent right to lie. Quote, there are lots of different situations when the government has legitimate reasons to give out false information. Coincidentally enough, Barbara was not the only person aboard American Airlines Flight 77 with connections to Washington. For the pilot, Charles Burlingame, just so happened to work at the Pentagon for 10 years, assisting the Defense Department on, wait for it, anti-terrorism strategies. So now that's multiple anti-terrorism intel agents on these flights. And what else happened in regards to Flight 77? Well, Monday, September 10th, Donald Rumsfeld had announced this.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
Well, it should come at this point as no surprise to anyone watching this that it was the Budgets Analyst's Office where they were quote-unquote looking for this $2.3 trillion in unaccounted for transactions that just so happened to get hit and explode. Furthermore, the Pentagon, which is the security center for our entire country, for some reason has no security camera footage of the plane, save for 3 frames of it from across the street. What happened to all these cameras? Did they mysteriously black out right at the second the plane came as if they were guarding Jeffrey Epstein? And they're there, quite visible in many pictures from the Pentagon that day. 1, 2, and 3. But alas, all we've gotten is this. There's something about what hit that day they do not want people to see. There's zero chance the Pentagon doesn't have real footage of this incident. They've had over 20 years in the lead up to AI to release it. Now it's too late. If it was Flight 77 and went down exactly as they have told us, they would have released that video the following week. Instead, they waited 4 years and released 3 blurry frames. Nothing about the attack on the Pentagon makes sense. In the hours following the event, aviation sources described Flight 77 as having been flown with extraordinary skill, even marveling at the presence of mind of the hijacker to shut off the transponder. But this, however, also makes no sense. According to hijacker Hani Hanjour's flight instructors, his piloting skills were so shoddy earlier that year that they questioned if his 1999 pilot's license was even genuine. They described him as a very bad pilot who shouldn't even be in the air, with one employee expressing his amazement, quote, he could not fly at all. Yet on September 11th, Hanoi Hanjor allegedly performed an extraordinarily skilled 330-degree descending corkscrew to perfectly smash his plane into the middle of the Pentagon. Very believable. But now going back to the second part of this statement, the alleged hijackers' presence of mind to turn off the transponder codes, they didn't just change on Flight 77. The transponder codes changed on all 4 flights that day, with 3 of them disappearing altogether. According to the secondary surveillance radar data, at 8:47, the flight being tracked as United 175 would suddenly start showing 2 different transponder codes. This would go unnoticed for 4 minutes while air traffic control frantically looked for Flight 11. By the time they would check back, they could only speculate that the aircraft on radar was still United 175. The reason for this is that the only way to identify a plane is via their transponder code. Once that's shut off, all radar can do is tell you that something is flying at that place, not what is flying at that place. Hence, for the final 10 minutes of its journey, it is referred to as, quote, the unidentified aircraft believed to be United 175. Air traffic controllers lost Flight 11's transponder code altogether at 8:21, immediately degrading the information about the aircraft. 17 minutes later, American Airlines SOG Halleck would report that they have no active read on Flight 11. United 93's transponder code was lost at 9:41, and by 9:53, controllers had lost track of it on radar as well. And as for Flight 77, air traffic control lost anything on radar even resembling American Airlines 77 for 29 minutes after its transponder code also disappeared. Until an object on radar going in the complete opposite direction with no transponder code was tracked under the assumption that it was Flight 77, right into the Pentagon. It was during the same time frame of the lost Flight 77 that reports started coming in from the FAA to NORAD that American Airlines Flight 11 had been spotted still in the air, headed towards Washington, 35 minutes after it allegedly struck Tower 1, leading the FAA to state that it was evidently another aircraft that hit the tower. Takeoff times of the drone aircraft and the actual aircraft will be scheduled to allow a rendezvous where the drone aircraft will continue to fly the filed flight plan. Operation Northwoods. Another often overlooked factor is that Hani Hanjour's 2 alleged counterparts on Flight 77, Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Midhar, actively rented rooms in the lead-up to 9/11 from an anti-terrorism FBI informant. Just a minor detail that also seems to be missing from the yearly fluff pieces all the major networks put out on September 11th. And finally, the impact zone also makes no sense. On one hand, the wings are reported to have mostly disintegrated on impact, as before the roof collapses, there appears to only be a singular hole. Yet at the same time, we're expected to believe the fuselage somehow managed to plow through the equivalent of not 1, not 2, but 3 full rings of the Pentagon, opening up a hole in Corridor C. How could a plane that we already went over is like paper to steel have gone through 3 full buildings, essentially? Thick reinforced concrete walls. Here, footage of a plane being smashed into a concrete wall at even higher speeds. Now, the single wall is thicker and the plane is smaller, so it's not an exact 1-to-1, but the thought of a regular 757 going through 3 whole buildings feels hard to believe after watching this. At least absent some sort of explosive materials on board. It's also hard to believe, again, that this was literally simulated less than 11 months earlier. That's some incredible foresight. And here is some more incredible foresight.
Officials have begun a major investigation into whether someone or many people benefited financially from the evil done to the country last Tuesday. Not long before the attacks occurred, there were some financial transactions in the stock market that may indicate knowledge of the attack before it began. ABC's Antonio Mora is here. If they ever get to the bottom of it, it will be astonishing.
Astonishing, no question, Peter. What many Wall Street analysts believe is that the terrorists made bets that a number of stocks would see their prices fall. They did so by buying what are called puts. If you bet right, the rewards can be huge. The risks are also huge, unless, of course, you know something bad is going to happen to the company you're betting against. One example, United Airlines. The Thursday before the attack, more than 2,000 contracts betting that the stock would go down were purchased. 90 times more in one day than in 3 weeks. When the markets reopened, United stock dropped. The price of the contracts soared, and someone may have made a lot of money fast.
$180,000 turns into $2.4 million when that plane hits the World Trade Center.
It's almost the same story with American Airlines.
That's a 5-fold increase in the value of what was a $337,000 trade on Monday.
All of a sudden becomes what?
$1.8 million.
And there's much more, including an extraordinarily high number of bets against Morgan Stanley and Marsh & McLennan, two of the World Trade Center's biggest tenants.
Could this be a coincidence? This would be one of the most extraordinary coincidences in the history of mankind if it was a coincidence.
So major short selling went on with United and American immediately preceding the event. More specifically, 4,744 put options to 396 calls were put on United Airlines 5 days before September 11th, and 4,516 put options to 748 calls were put on American Airlines 1 day before September 11th. No other airline companies had an unusual put-to-call ratio in the days leading up to the attacks. Clearly, someone knew. But nope, this occurrence was determined a coincidence by the SEC and FBI because the people doing it were, quote, U.S.-based and had no ties to Al-Qaeda. So, you're still not going to follow that lead? We're supposed to believe that nearly 5,000 put options being purchased on each airline involved in the attack just a few days prior is just an innocuous coincidence? No other airliners had massive short selling in the week prior, just United and American. And part of the FBI's reasoning behind dismissing this is because the buyers were U.S. based? You know who else was U.S. based and made a ton of money following the attacks on September 11th? The Carlyle Group and their many investors, like Bush's chief legal advisor and advisor on the Iraq War, James Baker. Deputy CIA Director joined the foundation of Operation Cyclone, Frank Carlucci. And of course, Bush Sr. Follow the money. One of the most powerful questions in any investigation is memorialized in the Latin phrase, qui bono, who benefits. On the 14th of December 2001, just 3 months after the attacks, Halliburton, KBR, is awarded the U.S. Army Logistics Civil Augmentation Program 3 contract to provide a complete array of service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, under any condition and at any location around the globe, including, but not limited to, the construction of facilities, transportation, utilities, meals, housing, laundry, mail. The full spectrum. LOGCAP 3 was one of the largest government service contracts in history. In 2003, Halliburton was also awarded another contract on top of the ongoing LOGCAP named RIO for Restore Iraqi Oil. For this, Halliburton put together a team to do exactly that, build oil infrastructure in Iraq. Now, why are these contracts a conflict of interest, you might ask? Because from 1995 up until the day he was announced as George Bush's vice president, Halliburton's chairman of the board and chief executive officer was none other than Dick Cheney. Carlyle and Halliburton, both making massive fortunes in the wake of September 11th. What are the odds? Coincidentally enough, Carlyle chairman Carlucci and Halliburton CEO Cheney were also part of another organization, along with 14 other future members of the Bush administration, including Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld, Bush's top two in the DoD. Project for the New American Century, a neoconservative think tank focused on U.S. foreign policy, who in 1998 wrote an open letter calling for the removal of Saddam Hussein via full-scale ground invasion as the only way to remove the threat of WMDs. and whose 2000 report on, quote, rebuilding America's defenses stated that due to the dramatic reduction in military research and development, their envisioned transformation would be a long process, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
This is being seen on Capitol Hill as another Pearl Harbor.
Everybody's talking about a second Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
Well, looks like they got their wish. Which brings us finally to the man who ties them all together, George H.W. Bush. And the question, would he have been aware of the Operation Northwoods proposals? According to the official documentation, Bush didn't enter the CIA until January of '76 when he became director. That's some 14 years after Northwoods had circulated. Or at least that's what people thought, until July of 1988, when a memorandum from 1963 surfaces putting Bush in the CIA a lot earlier than previously admitted. It's an update direct from J. Edgar Hoover himself on the situation surrounding the assassination of Kennedy, sent to one Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency. Putting George H.W. Bush, the man who spent the eve of September 11th with Osama bin Laden's brother, Bush Jr.'s future envoy and advisor to the Iraq War, and one of the masterminds of Operation Cyclone in the CIA, at very least within 1 year of the infamous Operation Northwoods document, the blueprint of 9/11. So in summation, I reject the official narrative of September 11th. While easy to swallow in its simplicity amidst its chaotic aftermath, when one finally stops to examine it with a sober head, it completely falls apart. Not a single facet of their story is held up over time. But why? Why orchestrate such a catastrophic event? The why is because I believe war is control. With ongoing war comes a general uneasiness. An uneasy public is a controllable public. In the name of safety, the machine was finally able to enact their surveillance state via the newly branded Patriot Act, which of course is always the most important goal of any operation. Ways to get the public to willingly give up their rights, tightening their control. September 11th ushered in a police state under the panic of national security. I also believe war is freedom. It's a license to run amok on the world stage. The CIA was finally free to resume clandestine activities in Afghanistan, and this time alongside the full-scale invasion coveted just 1 year prior. With all the funding their heart could desire. Full freedom. Since September 11th, the United States has sent nearly $4 trillion to Iraq and Afghanistan. Who audits the billions paid for war? Who actually receives the money? I believe these reasons to be the why. Now, as for the how. I believe Towers 1, 2, and 7 were absolutely rigged for demo. I believe their free fall pulverization into dust specifically mimics the high-rise implosion technique that typically employs the explosive gelatin, which just so happens to be the name of the group who worked on the B thing, followed by the E team, pictured standing nearly in the exact same spot the first plane hits, next to 100 fuse casing boxes. I believe the Pentagon mass casualty event in Amalgam Virgo with dry runs, with Operation Northwoods being the blueprint. I believe the hijackings were staged by a combination of Operation Cyclone assets and insider passengers from our intel communities and abroad, knowing full well they would never be able to be seen in public again. I believe the planes were landed and the passengers forced under duress to call loved ones, which is why their cell phones went. I believe that while that went on, 737 drone planes painted as exact replicas of the hijacked airliners were remote piloted into Tower 1 and Tower 2, and that after waiting a nominal period of time, both buildings were then intentionally brought down by the aforementioned pre-placed dynamite. These are the reasons I no longer believe the official narrative surrounding 9/11. There were too many moving parts and too many cameras rolling, and far too many details that don't line up. Nothing has aged worse than September 11th. A false flag that will live in infamy.